Welcome to members of the public and people associated with applications. Thank you for coming through the rain. At least it's not boiling hot. Welcome to everybody that's watching on YouTube tonight, and welcome members. I'm Councillor Yvonne Estop, chairing the meeting. Councillor Stephen Watson is vice chair. And I'll introduce the people that are alongside us here. Neil Button, Nick Reed and Diane Verona are the planning officers who give us professional planning advice. Victoria Wilders will give legal advice. Peter Mannings, Democratic Services advice. And also in attendance, Councillor Vicky Glover-Ward, who is executive member for Planning and Growth, and Sarah Saunders, who's head of planning. So item 1. Are there any apologies?
Yes, Chairman. 2 apologies from Councillor Dunlop and from Councillor Stowe. Councillor Bull is substituted for Councillor Stowe and Councillor Smith substituted for Councillor Dunlop. Thank you.
Thank you. Second item, Chair's announcements. Just the usual reminder, please, to use the microphone, because not only does it make you heard, but we have people online. Item 3, are there any declarations of interest, please? Thank you. Item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting. Members, we have in front of us the minutes of the meeting from the 19th of July. Do any of you have any amendments? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not listed on the present list, but I was substituting for Councillor Burt on that occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing that out.
Yes.
Are there any other amendments? If the minutes appear to be an accurate record, can I have somebody to propose? Councillor Buckmaster, thank you. And somebody to second the minutes? Councillor Hill, thank you. And then can I see those in agreement that it's an accurate record? And anybody against? And anybody abstaining because they weren't here? Thank you very much. Now we go on to item 5, which are the applications in front of us this evening. And first of all, it's application 3/21/. Actually, there's another introduction I have to make. We will be having a traffic and transport advisor from Herts County Council joining us, and who will be available for questions. And Mark Youngman will appear on screen. So the item 5A, application 3/21/1756/FUL. This is the former gates of Stortford, 295 to 297 Stansted Road in Bishop Stortford. And the application is for demolition of all the existing buildings, building a retail food store with associated car parking, a reconfigured site access, servicing, landscaping, swale, and installation of plant equipment. As you all know, members, this application was considered by this committee in December, different makeup, but this committee made a resolution to grant permission. That's a material consideration that we have to bear in mind. So I wonder if I could ask Neil Button to introduce the case.
Thank you, Councillor, and good evening to all the other councillors for braving the wet weather outside. As Councillor has already alluded to, this is a full application which is already come before you or come before the previous planning committee. Change the slide, please. Thank you. The site's located on the northern edge of Bishop Stortford on Stansted Road. The site comprises a former car dealership, and the site is located just to the south of the junction of the A120. Next page, please. The site is located to the north of the town centre in Bishop Stortford. It's also located within the vicinity of the Bishop Stortford North development, which is taking place. As part of that development, there are a couple of neighbourhood centres that are shown in the slide with the stars. There are also other local centres, Snurley Parade to the southeast of the site with the town centre to the south. There are other local parades on Havers Lane, Thorley District Centre and Bishop's Park, which are also shown on this slide. And this is a full application where full planning permission was granted, resolution to grant permission back in December, subject to conditions under 106. And the recommendation included the option to refuse within 3 months if the Section 106 agreement had not been completed. Therefore, 3 months has elapsed, and therefore it is necessary for the planning committee to extend the resolution to permit the 106 to be signed. And the 106 has currently been agreed between the parties and is ready to be completed subject to the resolution of the planning committee again. Additional representations have also been received by UKPN and the adjoining neighbour at 289 Stansted Road. The UKPN inquiries relate to whether development could restrict access to the substation, which is located to the south of the site, which I can show you shortly. And also the letter from the adjoining neighbour raising concern about public sector equality duties alongside concerns that were raised as part of the previous committee on access and parking and noise and disturbance and so on. It's all set out within the committee report that you have before you tonight, and also in the previous committee report that was prepared back in December. As the retail studies were carried out in 2022, we also considered it necessary to update this assessment to ensure that the decision and the resolution that this committee makes is up to date at the current time upon resolution. The sequential assessment of sites has also been considered to determine whether there are any other suitable or alternative sites. And members are asked to give due consideration to the additional matters alongside the DMC previous resolution set out in the previous report. But what I intend to do for the members of this committee is to run back through the previous presentation so that you have the full set of information to go on before you make a decision on this application. So if we can go on to page 5 or slide 5. Okay. Yep, that's fine. So the site's located to the south of an industrial area, which includes a number of car dealerships and also a number of other retail showrooms to the north of the site. There are residential areas to the south on Stansted Road and Ainsworth Avenue, Oaklands Park to the east. And so the site is in a mixed area, but is highly accessible. The railway line runs to the back of the site on the western boundary. And at the bottom corner of the site, just next to the railway line on the corner, there is a UKPN substation, and it is that land which is relevant to the. I'll point that out for the purposes of the members in the room so they can see. Next slide, please. A couple of photos of the site as it is today, or as it has been very recently, hoarded up at the frontage with the former car showrooms no longer in use, along with the buildings to the rear of the site. Next slide, please. This is a couple of photographs of the site in its sort of pre-condition where the gates of Stortford were still in place. And a couple of other photographs, we can move the next slide, of the site as it was when in occupation as a car showroom, number of vehicles on the site characterized, the character of the site, along with the large retail showrooms, offices and workshops. Next slide, please. This is a comparison of the proposed floor plan of the supermarket and car parking areas with the previous buildings on site. And you'll notice that there is less buildings on site, with the frontage building being removed, replaced with a frontage car park, and the superstore located at the rear of the site with the servicing yard at the back, car parking all around. The full application is for approximately 2,368 square meters of gross external retail floor space, which is the equivalent of 2,275 gross internal area. And off that area, 1,411 square meters represents the net sales area. 80% of that area is for convenience goods. The application before you is for a limited assortment discounted retailer, and that has a limited range of goods. In terms of the scheme details, there are 137 car parking spaces, 10 disabled spaces, 10 parent and child spaces. These are located in the more accessible parts of the site. 10% of the spaces are conditioned to be electrical vehicle chargers, including 2 spaces at the frontage, which are rapid chargers, and so that means they can get a full charge within half an hour. Additional cycle parking is proposed in the frontage of the superstore for visitors along with staff. The vehicular access at the frontage of the site, which is an existing vehicle access, is proposed to be widened to allow for the potential additional traffic to come and go, along with the various delivery and servicing vehicles that are required to service the food store. There are also a number of landscaping proposals. There are some other slides that will include those details you'll see shortly, along with acoustic fencing around the back of 289 Stansted Road. There are photovoltaic panels within the roof of the building, along with rear servicing. Next slide, please. This is a layout that's been submitted as part of the application, which includes the confirmation of the floor space details, which I mentioned previously. Okay, next slide. This slide identifies the hard landscaping scheme and the materials that are being proposed. A number of these materials are, I guess, fairly synonymous with the supermarket Lidl stores, and so the sort of corporate colours, but they are of a durable quality, high quality for the use, and therefore they've been clearly identified in the plans. That includes the close board fencing, timber fencing around the boundaries. It includes a low Jackson Diamond timber knee rail at the frontage of the site. There are other concrete retaining wall and metal railings around selected parts of the site, along with palisade fencing at the rear. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates the elevations of the proposed development. There are no changes to the elevation that was proposed this time around than what was proposed previously, and so the quality elevations mainly include aluminium cladding panels, grey render, aluminium frame windows with PV panels on the roof, along with the Lidl corporate logo and colours, and so no change there. But the building itself is about 7.1 metres in height, and the scheme is, as you would expect a Lidl store to be. I've got some more images of that, which you can see on this slide here. This is a CGI. Okay, next slide. This slide identifies the landscaping that is existing and proposed within the site, and so the large green area at the top of the slide is the retained vegetation and trees that are adjacent to the Birchhanger Brook. No change to that is proposed. There are proposals for hedging around the edges of the site, and that continues around the full site boundary, along with tree planting in selected locations. Next slide. A number of amendments were made to the application that was presented to the committee previously. And these aren't new amendments as such, but I think it's worthwhile drawing your attention to these amendments, because they sort of pick up on some of the issues that have come up in the additional representations. Amendments were made to the internal site layout, which provide a better pedestrian environment, and that includes a safer walking environment with widened walkways, crossing points, level access to the building itself, and as I say, that safer crossing. Those plans, improvements to the plans, were specifically requested by planning officers and the highways officers, and in the original highways representations back in 2021, reference was made at the time to requiring these changes as a result of the council's equality duties under our public sector equality duty under the 2010 Act. And so a number of changes were sought to the site itself to make sure that it was accessible and met all users in terms of visitors to the shopping centre and users of the facility. There are also a number of improvements to pedestrian crossing points within the vicinity of the site. So there are 11 locations within the immediate area within a 1 kilometre length of Stansted Road. And there is a new crossing point across Stansted Road proposed to the south of the site. A new southbound bus stop and shelter to be provided in close proximity to the site. And a new or improvements to the northbound bus stop within the vicinity, and that will include real-time passenger information. So all of these changes were sought during the course of the application prior to the last committee that members got a chance to discuss on. There's additional conditions that are set out in the current report that go a little step further, one step further, and identify what specific requirements are needed. So I'll draw your attention to those as well. If we can skip on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This picks up on the concern that was raised by UKPN in terms of how the substation at the rear of the site would be accessed. The addendum note that you have before you identifies that there is a slight change to how it is described in the report. In terms of the existing access to the substation, it will still be accessed through the proposed site, but there is a new ramp that is proposed to step down towards the substation, and that access has been designed to accommodate large, suitable sized HGV vehicles, and the plan that you see on the screen now identifies the tracking for a large vehicle entering and reversing and leaving the site in forward gear and reverse gear. It's important to note also at this point that there is no objection to any of this from the county's highways officer. Next slide, please. So we've already heard that there is a resolution to approve subject to conditions and a 106, and this in the officer's view represents a very significant material consideration. Haven't been any revisions made to the plans post that date, and so there are no additional details of the scheme for which to consider. There are representations that have been made which we've considered and are set out in detail within the report. As I already mentioned, we have updated the retail impact assessment, and that has identified that the sequential test that looks at all those other centres that you saw in the earlier slide, the impact on those centres has been considered, and that there aren't any, or that there's not considered to be a significant impact on any of those local centres. The report identifies the sensitivity test indicates that there is a 2.5 to 5.2% impact on the centre and on those local centres in terms of trade draw, but that doesn't fall within the realms of being a material significantly worsening of any of those local centres. And so in line with our original expert officer advice that was presented back in December and the advice given by our retail consultants, that impact remains broadly similar to what it was at the time in December, and so the conclusions remain the same. Secondly, the sequential test that looks at whether there are any other sequentially preferable sites, that has been re-looked at by officers. And again, we've looked at all the sites that were within the original sequential assessment, and none of those were considered or are considered suitable for the proposed superstore. Most of them are either too small or they're not available, and so the report sets out the detail for those. You've heard briefly we discuss about the equality considerations that the council has a public sector equality duty. The report goes into reasonable lengths to explain what are our obligations under that, And a number of planning conditions were specifically sought within the previous recommendation. Those conditions were updated following the committee meeting that took place in December, and further improvements to those conditions that considered the various equalities needs and also highways needs were amended. And in the addendum note, you'll note the number of conditions that that have been changed. So I draw your attention to those. It is important to make a distinction as well in terms of the issues that you are using to determine the planning application. In this case, the development plan, unless material considerations to determine otherwise. And in this case, the material considerations suggest that the development could be supported. The scheme does comply with most of the elements of the district plan. There are identified areas of the development plan that are not complied with, and that relates to employment use. That is covered within the original report, and so it isn't necessary to sort of go back and revisit that today, but needs to say the conclusion and the planning balance remains as it was previously in December. So our recommendation is to approve subject to 106 and conditions. And I would also like to draw your attention, as I've done a couple of times, to the addendum note, to the comment I made about the UKPN substation access and the clarification to the comment on page 29 about disregarding the no change to the access. There is a change and it's a ramp, but the tracking plans indicate that the site is still accessible. Also, I need to draw your attention to the letter from Tesco's, and that letter picks up a number of issues that were picked up under the previous report, and in the officer comment section of the addendum note, those comments are fully addressed. There is one letter of support that has received, that should be noted. And then I just draw your attention to the various changes to the conditions. But other than that, our recommendation is to improve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. The advisor from Herts County Council Highways is actually Matt Armstrong. If he's around, he could be on screen, I think now. And then if we need to come back to you, Neil, if you need to show some plans, we could just put the plans back. So now it's to hear from people who want to speak to the committee. First of all, could I invite Cheryl Sovery, please, to come. Welcome. And as you know, you have 3 minutes.
My name is Cheryl Sovery and I live at 289 Stansted Road in the property directly adjacent to the application site 295. We are surprised, concerned and appalled that our family has had to resort to seeking legal advice and intervention to make East Herts District Council's planning department aware that this planning application process has been carried out without due diligence and consideration to our daughter, who is severely disabled and covered under the Equalities Act section 149. Throughout this planning process, there appears to have been little or no consideration given under PSED until the month of September 23, where the planning department, under notification from the council's legal team, were added appropriate wording. We observe that the planning department is still advising that you approve this application without requesting all specialists involved in the planning submission review and resubmit their reports to ensure and confirm that our daughter's disabilities and service provision requirements have been considered under PSED. This is going against the planning policy covered under this Act. Remove or minimise disadvantages suffered by persons who share a relevant protected characteristic that are connected to that characteristic. Take steps to meet the needs of persons who share a relevant protected characteristic that are different from the needs of persons who do not share it, and encourage persons who share a relevant protected characteristic to participate in life or in any other activity in which participation of such persons is disproportionately low. In 2011, this committee accepted the close proximity of the site entrance road when an application to demolish and rebuild a new main dealership and adjacent car park was submitted. That committee requested the access road be moved from the boundary to improve our privacy and noise. This was even with the constraints of the new showroom remaining on the front of the site. This application was not for a change of use from a car dealership to a popular supermarket. Site vehicle traffic is going to increase considerably. We know firsthand as we live there. Dear committee members, refuse this application so that all aspects of the planning process are followed in the comprehensive and robust manner under PSED guidelines. Furthermore, consider the appointment of an independent specialist to report back the effect this application will have on a disabled adult whose associated characteristics are protected under the Equalities Act 2010, Section 149. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to ask Laura Beach to speak on behalf of the application, the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Laura Beach and I'm an Associate Director at Walsingham Planning. By way of background, Lidl submitted its application for a new food store back in 2021. The development team has worked closely with the council over the last 2 years to ensure that all issues have been resolved. The application was debated thoroughly at the Development Management Committee held in December 2022, and members voted unanimously to approve the application. For the reasons outlined in the committee report, it is necessary for the application to return to committee. However, since the last committee date, there have been no changes to the development proposals, and there have been no changes to the development plan. There are no unaddressed material considerations and no reason why the committee should now take a different view on the proposals. Lidl remains entirely committed to delivering a new neighbourhood food store for the residents of Bishop Stortford, which will bring a range of social, economic and environmental benefits for the town. The scheme represents a multi-million-pound investment which will secure the regeneration of the former Gates of Stortford site, which has now been vacated. The proposal will make efficient use of previously developed land, which lies in a sustainable location close to both existing residential communities and the area of housing growth towards the north of the town. The new store will widen local consumer choice, which is particularly important in the current cost of living crisis, and will be Lidl's first store in the district. The scheme will generate a wide range of new jobs and training opportunities for local residents, including full and part-time positions with an above living wage rate of pay. The application is accompanied by a comprehensive landscaping scheme and will deliver a biodiversity net gain of over 10%. The proposal will include sustainability features such as solar panels and electric charging facilities. We have also worked closely with your Highways Authority and they are supportive of the proposals. The objective here is to promote active travel to ensure that there is not an over-reliance on the car. As such, a strong package of enhancements is proposed, including upgrading local bus stops and footpath links to ensure easy access to the store by a variety of modes of travel. We also fully understand the concerns of the site's immediate neighbours, but it should be reiterated that the scheme will use an existing road access and this will in no way compromise access to neighbouring properties. Lidl has met with the residents of the neighbouring property on several occasions and fully intends to continue this engagement, as per the wording of proposed condition 35. In summary, there are no planning reasons why the application should not be approved in line with your officer's clear recommendation and in line with the committee's previous resolution to approve. Lidl is keen to deliver its planned investment in Bishop Stortford and get started on site, and we hope that your support will be forthcoming once more. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to welcome Matt Armstrong. Welcome to the meeting from the Highway Authority. Members, it's open to you now, please. Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chair. My only slight concern is the traffic congestion on Stansted Road, particularly in the morning rush hour, 9 o'clock. It's absolutely gridlocked, that road. So introducing more traffic, I cannot see how that's going to work. One of the things that the lady spoke about was upgrading footpaths. But in that area, it's out of town. People don't really walk out. They won't walk out from the centre of Bishop Stortford to get to Lidl. So upgrading footpaths, I see as a little waste of time, really. Can I have an answer to that? Thank you. Thank you.
Would it be okay to go to you first and then to Matt?
Yeah, that's okay.
Mhm.
I mean, Matt can come in if there's anything else. So the first point on traffic congestion, that was considered under a transport assessment that was submitted by the applicant, considered by the county's highways team in 2021, 2022. The increase in traffic which may occur is considered to be within acceptable tolerances. Therefore, in terms of the additional traffic, that in itself does not give rise to a reason to refuse the application. It doesn't create unsafe highways conditions. In terms of the second point on upgrading footpaths, that's proposed as a benefit of the scheme to encourage people walking to the site. And so the hope is that people, there are some interesting announcements today by the Prime Minister, but I think this is again, moving towards a more active way of accessing facilities, shopping facilities. And so walking and cycling, using public transport are both those initiatives that improving the walkways and the facilities within the vicinity of this site are considered to respond to. And so both of those points, I'm not sure whether my colleague from Highways has got anything to add to that, but neither of those would give rise to reasons to refuse the application. As I said, they were dealt with very comprehensive under the previous committee, and there are no changes to consider after that.
Mr. Armstrong, are you there? And would you like to say something about traffic impact assessment?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, members. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't know whether you can see me. My video's saying it's on.
We're only hearing small noises, I'm afraid.
Oh, really? Oh, everything seems set from my end.
So Matt, we can't hear you. I don't know whether you can get closer to your microphone or something like that.
Yeah, is that any better? No, it doesn't sound like it.
Can you hear us? If you can hear us, I think we need you to restart, because we're not hearing you. Thank you. Councillor Copley.
Thank you. Before I'd actually heard the public speakers, I was actually going to ask about whether condition 5 had actually met the requirements of the disabled occupier at 289. But obviously from hearing the speaker, I understand that they haven't. Is there anything we can do to talk to the local residents about any improvements that may allow us to meet their requirements, but also go ahead with the scheme? Because I do think it's important that we think about local residents here. And Councillor Devonshire has already talked about the traffic issues, which I do think this can only make worse. I mean, obviously you're going along and you're kind of hitting Hockrell Junction at the end, which anybody who lives in Stortford knows how horrendous is. So I do think it is important to think about, this kind of impact on particular residents, the traffic impact on others, and just the site in general. So I just wondered if officers were able to talk to any local residents about what might improve things for them. Thank you.
Neil, would you be able to say a little bit more? We've heard from Ms. Sovery. Would you be able to say a bit more about what you have understood as the needs of the disabled daughter, and how they have been addressed, and what conversations there have been?
Certainly. Try and answer the councillor's question first as well, about the conditions. In the condition 35, as you referred to, that one specifically requires consultation liaison with the occupiers of 289, and that's a
So I was thinking about condition 5. Sorry, probably didn't speak very clearly.
Condition 35 is probably and condition 3, they're relevant because they require details of landscaping, boundary treatment, in proximity to their property, and so that's in discussion, and we will only discharge that condition has it been demonstrated to us that they've consulted with and have worked with the resident to get as acceptable an outcome as they can. In terms of is there anything more that can be done, I can probably refer to the one of the earlier slides that showed a landscaping scheme, and that includes hedgerows around the edges of the site, includes the noise buffer, which would pick up on some of the particular sensitive requirements. I'd like to sort of draw members' attention to the report, if I may, actually, because under section sort of 6.31 all the way down to 6.42, the report sets out how the equality considerations have been given their due regard, as we have to demonstrate, as is our public sector duty. And on the 6.37 particular, in the report, it identifies the specific needs of the occupier, and it acknowledges that there is a sensitivity to prolonged periods of noise. It identifies that there are disabilities that relate to mobility, requiring a wheelchair, and therefore that there is a range of mitigation measures that is needed to address those specific conditions. And then in the following sections of the report, we identify all of those conditions whereby access and mobility are considered. And it's important to emphasize that it's consideration for the occupier in the property, but also any visitor of the site under the protected individual of protected consideration characteristics under the Equalities Act. And so we've identified quite a few conditions relating to the design of that junction. We've identified conditions about landscaping and boundary treatment, and all of those are ways that the circumstances will or could be improved, and that liaison with the resident in that process will be a continuation of the next period of the council in demonstrating its equalities duties. I mean, picking up the point about the access to the site, it's already been made several times that is the existing access, and the arrangements don't greatly change. In fact, the junction has been made safer by pulling the crossing back into the site, and it's been made a certain width in order to accommodate the vehicles that are coming and going to the site. And so the development results in improvement in terms of accessibility on those grounds. And in terms of the noise, there are a number of conditions that are identified that the report sets out. Some of these relate to traffic management plan, construction, logistics plans, and so they're all about when the construction is taking place, and that they have to take place to guidelines that limit the noise. There are other conditions that relate to noise level from external plant that's fixed to the development, and that can't operate beyond certain restrictions, and that is again designed specifically with local residents in mind. There are conditions 30 and 31 that relate to restriction on deliveries, refuse times, collection times, and the food store itself is restricted in its opening times to sensitive hours, particularly now on Sundays, which is only until 4. And so there are a number of measures that the report identifies that the council has carried out its public sector equalities duty. We've specifically referenced the needs of the resident in this instance, plus we've gone further and identified where the wider needs of users of the site, may be identifying all of the protected characteristics and individuals that may be affected by the scheme, and how the mitigation measures will seek to reverse some of those impacts and be considered acceptable in planning terms. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive explanation there. I just wanted to check that we do continue to talk to residents and ask them for what they want, and if we can accommodate those things. I think it's very positive to do that, because sometimes you actually find out things that we may have identified don't actually meet some of the things that they want, and something they might be able to put forward very, very simply, which we can do, which does. So I just encourage that dialogue with residents and listening to what they have to say, so we can help them here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holt.
Oh, thank you. Regarding a point that was picked up on regarding bus stops, and from my understanding, the improving of bus stops, and then also bringing that into the question that was asked regarding the traffic. Whereabouts are the nearest, I suppose, public transport, which would be those bus stops related to the proposed development, just to understand, how feasible is it for individuals to actually use those bus stops when they're making shopping, and then, obviously then returning to home. So yeah, that's my answer. My question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holt. I wonder if we could just see a plan that shows the bus stops and the crossing, please.
Be an image on slide. There should be an image on slide 17. Yeah, that's one. So I'll get my pen out. There we go. This is the crossing. This is the southbound bus stop. And then the northbound bus stop is located here. There are a number of other conditions that are relate to improvements to the 1 kilometre length of Stansted Road crossing points, and there you can't see it very well in this image, but on the inset plan that shows the stretch of Stansted Road where the improvements have been identified. The condition which is set out in the report identifies what's required on those junctions.
Councillor Hill.
Hi, thank you. I'd just like to clarify, there's been a lot of talk of active travel, but I haven't heard a mention of individual cycle paths. And when I read the report, it says this is incorporated into the roads, which I take it means cyclists use the roads.
Thank you. We'll ask Matt some of these questions now. Are you with us, Matt?
Yeah, can you hear me now? No, it doesn't sound like it. No, okay. Sorry, I don't know
Really
what
frustrating.
I don't know what the issue is.
It's a connection problem, Matt, and we can only hear very little bits of you.
Everything's fine from my end. I do apologise.
Phoning, is that a possibility? No, the video's off. So, Matt, I'm sorry we can't hear you, but we do need you and your advice. So all I can suggest is that you try one more time.
Yeah, everything's set up from my end. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what the issue is. I'll message your East Herts colleague and see whether there's an alternative.
No, we can't hear any of it. We can't make any sense, I'm afraid.
Chair, it may be that the planning officer can answer these questions because previously, obviously, highways had been here and given some answers in the previous decision. So it may be that the planning officer could adequately cover. Should we see how we get on?
I can even quote, if it's any helpful, the representations that were made in respect of the planning application that have come from the highways officer who's on the call, and so I can read out a general answer which relates to the comments that may help.
Could we start off with the traffic impact? If you were able to somehow convey the analysis of the impact on the roads of traffic. That was the question that we had from Councillor Coventry.
Thank you, Councillor. The highways officer comments that the highways authority are no longer capacity based. The local transport plan makes it clear that they need to accommodate the needs of pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport users, and that comes ahead of accommodating the needs of private motor car. That echoes the government guidance and various other guidelines that are in place. The Highways Authority concluded they are satisfied with the proposal. It's proposing sufficient measures which meaningfully put the needs of people who choose to travel by sustainable modes above the needs of people who choose to travel by the private motor car. Accepted that within the immediate vicinity there may be an increase in vehicle traffic in the short to medium term. However, as accommodating the convenience of motorists is no longer in line with both national and local policy, it would not be reasonable to expect the applicant to undertake vehicle capacity checks on wider highways network and carry out vehicle capacity improvements. So the Highways Office concludes that it's their view that the development will not result in an increase in traffic through the Hockerell junction, which was picked up at the time as an area of concern. The Highways Office has looked at the impact on neighbouring or close by junctions within the area and has not found that there is anywhere that would result in additional traffic that would give rise to harmful highways conditions within the area. And so additional traffic does not give a reason to refusal. And in fact, the measures that the scheme includes seek to reduce the number of vehicles on the road. There is a travel plan that is secured under a planning obligation, and that obligation seeks that the applicant and the retailer itself encourages staff to access the site through sustainable modes. And so the travel plan is also part of the mitigation measures of reducing the number of trips that are coming on the site. And as I say, the Highways Office is very, very clear throughout that they're not concerned about the number of additional trips as a result of this proposal, and that secondly, they're comfortable with the active travel measures that are proposed to facilitate the scheme for pedestrians and cycling. There is cycle spaces provided within the development for staff and for visitors, and so sufficient measures have been made available.
Councillor Copley.
Sorry, I just want to pick up, we were talking about traffic there. Does that extend to parking as well if there was insufficient parking on the site? But I'm just thinking that people could then end up parking in the residential roads surrounding if they came by cars and there wasn't sufficient parking for them. Thank you.
Yeah, that's been considered in the previous committee, and no issues with that. It comprises policy compliant in terms of parking numbers, and so there isn't expected to be an overspill.
Thank you.
Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go back to conditions 30 and 31? And you've got about the retail opening hours. You have actually got them open for 8 hours on a Sunday, where in fact I thought the Sunday licensing hours were 6. And bearing in mind the residents and the noise and everything that Councillor Copley also raised, would it not be a good neighbourly to restrict under condition 31 the actual delivery times to make it better for the neighbours?
That could be a justification for that in the event that noise from the use was going to cause that sufficient level of disturbance to warrant very strict operational hours. As part of the application, the Council's Environmental Health were consulted and have raised no objections on the basis of the hours of operation. I think it's also worth pointing out that there are conditions about noise from the actual use itself, so the plant that's fixed to the building, and that has got a noise restriction on in terms of that actual noise. But in terms of the comings and goings, that the uses would be very similar to a car showroom in terms of the comings and goings. There could be more traffic that's been picked up, but not to acceptable levels. And so in terms of the noise from the comings and goings, that's not been highlighted to be an environmental concern by the Council's Environmental Health colleagues. We've reduced the hours to closing to 4 o'clock on Sundays. And our understanding is that, that the standard operating times of sort of 10 to 4 are fairly across the board for the big superstores. Lidl being a discounted retailer as well, offering a reduced series of products would also probably have that need to have that extra time to make sure that they were selling, obviously opening on weekends is going to be the time when a lot of people are going to go. So
So Neil, condition 31, it covers delivery times, but it's all wrapped up together. So it's goods or deliveries or refuse recycling outside the hours of 7 to 10. So no nighttime deliveries.
yeah, I'm sorry, that's a typo. The condition 30 is the operating hours and 31 is the delivery hours. So the delivery hours.
It was delivery hours that you were asking about, wasn't it?
It was both. It was the operating hours under condition 30 that should be reduced for Sundays, and it was the delivery hours under 31. I was saying, would it be possible to reduce those to reduce the disturbance to the neighbours?
I mean, my previous response was that the environmental health haven't required that, and therefore in planning terms we don't have a policy to justify and require that. You know, we can ask the question, and it can be discussed with the applicant after this committee, should members opt to support the recommendation. If there was an alternative put forward, then it's something that could be discussed with the applicant and possibly agreed after the meeting.
That would be very helpful, thank you. We're going to, so we still have questions here that are not forgotten, because we have to come back to the active travel and the sort of travel hierarchy questions, walking, buses, cycling. But we're going to have another go at getting Matt, who's going to try and get to us on Teams. So I'd like to propose a short adjournment while we get that fixed up, because it's going to be a bit Heath Robinson, I'm afraid. Sorry. Oh yes, could somebody propose an adjournment, please? For 5 minutes. For 5 minutes, Councillor Watson.
I propose a 5-minute adjournment.
And anybody second that? Councillor Copley was up first.
I'm happy to second the 5-minute adjournment.
And we have to vote on that, please. Could you show if you are happy with that?
It's fine.
Thank you very much. 5 minutes.
It was a clear recommendation of refusal from us. So the original application, when it was first submitted, was very heavy focus on car users. And it didn't really consider the needs of pedestrians, cyclists and public transport users. And obviously with the urgent climate crisis, that's the priority now. There weren't any highway works proposed. The internal layout was very car dominated, didn't really very well cater for pedestrians from Stansted Road to the front of the store. The applicant did work with us reasonably positively, and over time, you've been hopefully seen a plan tonight. There's been improvements internally, so a 3-metre wide footpath internally to much better cater for people walking from the main road to the front of the store. We've got a signalised pedestrian crossing just very slightly south of the site, so that'll be a puff-in crossing, which is one of the new intelligent type crossings. So if somebody's a bit slower crossing over that, then it holds the signal on red for drivers until the person has got to the pavement. A new southbound bus stop with raised castle curbing, so those in wheelchairs, parents with buggies, that kind of thing can get on a bus conveniently. Real-time information display, a shelter, an upgraded northbound bus stop, so the northbound bus stop just very slightly north of the site access. Tactile paving and pedestrian drop curbs at all side roads along Stansted Road down to Parsonage Lane, some heading north as well. A travel plan, so staff who work there, have a range of sustainable travel measures. So I think that's a history to the site, and hopefully gives you a taste of where we're at as a county council with our local transport plan 4. Heavy focus on sustainable travel, active travel, accessible travel. That's where national policy is at as well. So the NPPF paragraphs 110 to 112 talk about, so there's 2 tests where it's a legitimate reason to refuse a development on highways grounds. So one of them is safety. And our safety team has reviewed this. We've checked that there's no obvious safety issues. The other is the test of severity, and paragraph 112 of the NPPF tells us what severity is. And it's basically any development that doesn't put the need of pedestrians, cyclists and public transport users first. So essentially the needs of the private motor car user is now at the bottom of the user hierarchy, and that's how we assess every planning application now. And our view is, the applicant, from where they were to where they are now, there's been a very significant amount of progress and change, and it is now acceptable to us. So hopefully that's a useful sort of background to the planning application, and just sort of a general overview of highways transport active travel policy.
Thank you, Matt. Members, are there any follow-up questions to that? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to query at the bottom of page 41, it talks about that the development is anticipated to be minor and negligible in terms of causing unsafe access and egress movements onto the neighbouring site, which is the private property. And I just wondered what research had been done into that and what evidence there is to demonstrate that that is the case. Thank you.
So, Matt, we've read the report about the effect on the adjoining property and the public sector equalities duty in relation to a disabled woman at that site. So I hope you heard that question.
Yes, but yes, sure.
In addition to that, could you tell us why the junction, the road entry has been widened from 7 to 9 meters roughly, and why that is safer in your view, because that's what we understand.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, could you refer me to your officer's report, that paragraph you just mentioned? paragraph
6.37.
6.37. Okay, just bear with me. Yeah, so I can't find that wording at the moment, but essentially I think what I would say is in terms of safety, there is no compromise. So the wording of the report there, I'm not entirely sure about that. So there's no compromise on safety. This doesn't make any of a more unsafe access. I think maybe what was trying to be said there was in terms of capacity, the free flow of traffic, there may be an impact, but again, that comes back to we're not a capacity-based authority anymore. But yeah, the access has been safety audited, so there's been a stage 1 road safety audit undertaken. Our safety team have assessed that, haven't raised any issues. The actual crossing distance for a pedestrian over the access won't change. So at the moment, it's just simple pedestrian drop curbs either side, almost in line with the pavement. And that's about a 9-metre crossing distance. The access is being widened very slightly to allow larger HGVs in and out for servicing of the supermarket. But the actual crossing distance for a passing pedestrian doesn't change because the pedestrian drop curves are being inset very, very slightly. So a little bit into the bell mouth, where it starts to kind of narrow in a little bit, still largely on the desire line of passing pedestrians. But there's tactile paving being added, which isn't there at the moment. So we're accommodating sight impaired users. And yeah, visibility is good. It meets standards. I'm happy to go into, I know there's been obviously specific concerns about the dwelling access next door. If members would like me to talk specifically about that.
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
Yes, so we understand, thank you, Matt, for telling, so we understand the pedestrian movement across the junction. That's everybody that might be walking along Stansted Road.
Yes.
But focusing on the impact on 289, where it's a very kind of acute and very specific need, which is really about reversing a vehicle out into the road and then being able to take off.
Sure.
It's a vehicle, a wheelchair capable vehicle. And so that is, and what we understand is that you haven't, there was a suggestion that the junction might be moved further north, but that wasn't, we understand from the report, that wasn't considered necessary. So that's one thing we want to understand. And secondly, that there's still an open conversation going on with the residents at 289. So could you tell us a bit more specifically about that need?
Sure. So maybe it's helpful to come from this from two different angles. So the broad principle of an individual dwelling crossover being that close to a commercial access, and then perhaps moving on to the specific situation of the resident at number 289. So in terms of the broad principle, we do have vehicle crossover guidance, which talks about it's good practice for crossovers to be at least 10 meters from a junction, a main road junction. This was discussed quite some detail at the last committee, and it was being referred to as the 10-meter rule. I was clarifying at the time, it's not actually a rule, it's a recommendation. So it's from our crossover guidance. It's good practice, but essentially it's looking at each situation, each application on its own merits. So in this particular case, we've got an existing commercial junction. We've got an existing residential access very close to it. That's not going to change. There's no accidents recorded there. As I say, it's been safety audited. typically very low vehicle movements from one dwelling access. 4 or 5 a day is usually the average. And there are many examples across the county, across the country, of single dwelling accesses being very close to a major sort of a main junction like that. So I think in broad principle, maybe not ideal, but it's not unusual, and there's no obvious intrinsic safety issue. Regarding the specific circumstances of the resident at 289, obviously you heard the representation tonight. My sympathy goes out to their situation. I've had family members in the past who have been disabled, and I've had to give them lifts along similarly kind of busy roads, and it does present challenges. Obviously, we're a consultee at the Highway Authority. Our remit is to advise your officers and yourselves tonight on the impact on public highway users primarily. Obviously, the resident at 289 is also a consultee and has made you aware of their particular circumstances. So, obviously, that's for members of the committee tonight to take all that on board. I think from our highways perspective, there was legal representation, I understand, and your officers will be able to give more details. I think some of the extracts of that legal letter were in your officers' committee report tonight, but it primarily seemed to be around noise, disturbance, and loss of privacy, which aren't highways issues as such. It's not within our remit. Having said that, looking back at the representations from the resident, it seems to be, I think, as you said, Chair, concerns around reversing out from that access onto Stansted Road with the proximity of the access. And also there's a large van or a minibus with a tail lift that parks outside, is my understanding, and picks up the disabled resident to take them to a day service centre. There's been no details of the frequency of that or how long this vehicle is typically parked up, but my guess is it would be a pickup in the morning and a drop off back in the afternoon, so perhaps twice a day. That's obviously already happening. Yes, there will be more traffic going in and out of what will be the supermarket access if that gets permission. But I would say in practice that's no different perhaps from a bus stop, which is located close to a junction. Again, that's not uncommon across the county. There are examples not far from here where a bus will stop up at a marked bus stop. So very close to a junction, and it doesn't cause any obvious kind of issues in that respect.
Thank you. I wonder if we could ask you, we share a public sector equality duty.
Mm-hmm.
We have a very specific case of that, which we want to ensure is done correctly and thoroughly. I still don't understand why the 10 meter, we're nowhere near 10 meters. The radius starts very soon after the house. So vehicles are beginning to turn almost next to it. I wonder whether you could continue talking to the planning officers, keeping in touch with the residents at 289, but talk some more about moving the junction northwards, because I can see that you might lose some parking spaces, but I can't see other reasons why that shouldn't happen. If it goes too far north, it gets too close to the next junction. But would you be able to look at that some more?
We have had presented to us a planning application that shows the access in the location that's before you tonight, and we've been asked to assess on that basis and respond to that, and that's what we've done. If the developer, if the applicant, were to go away and come forward with an alternative location, then of course we can look at that. But you know, we've been presented with the application before us tonight. Of course, you know, we're open to alternatives if that's seeing a, you know, a relocated access, but that's what the developer has presented to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo some of what Matt's just said, the scheme before you has been assessed on the basis of planning policies, the MPPF, and the severity test that has been identified by the highways officer. And in this instance, it is considered that in highway safety terms, the development is safe and doesn't give rise to that severe impact that would warrant a refusal. And so if members were taking a different line on that one, they are effectively operating against the advice from the Highways Authority and the Planning Authority at the same time. So if you've got good grounds to do so, then that's absolutely fine. But you've heard from the officers today, and you've heard from the Highways Officer. They can't require an access to be moved, although if they did choose to move it, then we would be duty bound to consider that application, of course. And so, and as part of our public sector equality duty, we've asked the question through the process as well, which I think is another important thing to consider.
Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Unless there's something I've missed in the report, there's nothing about, because there's no doubt about it, that local police and the local authority are not convinced that people keep to the limit along that road. Because I was confronted with a police van with a camera in it only last week. So, you know, I do know about that particular area. Has it been considered to reduce it when this development takes place? I know at the moment it's 30, but has there been any consideration about reducing it to 20? Because there will be a lot of activity going on. Irrespective to what you do, you're putting traffic styles in the way and that sort of thing. People will speed. There's no doubt about that. So is there any consideration about reducing it? Thank you.
Perhaps I can answer that. There isn't anything in the planning application. There's nothing in our report that says that. We do understand the process of consultation and testing for 20-mile-per-hour limits, and that's something that could be done separately another time.
I'm sorry, Councillor Ball. I mean, that would come into the discussion if you had such a significant impact from a single development that would require a proportionate response of changing the speed limit. And you've heard from the highways officer in this instance, they don't consider that this development would give rise to impacts that would require changing the speed limit at this current point in time as a result of these proposals. But as I say, guidance is changing all the time, and traffic will change all the time, and speed limits will get reviewed in the rounds, but not as a consequence of a planning application that is put forward today.
Matt, can I ask? Oh, Councillor Holt.
Very good. Thank you very much. Just following up on that, and you said the assessment wasn't made before regarding a change in the speed limit. In my understanding, then, if actually the development does have a larger impact than was assessed beforehand, and the reason why that recommendation wasn't made, then can a change take place after? So once the development's happened, and if it does have a considered big enough impact on local traffic. Thank you.
You can't retrospectively put in a condition after planning permission has been granted. So I think it's a very good point. Of course, that's why we have technical officers assessing the impacts at this point in the process, whereby we do anticipate the impacts of a development and try to secure all of the necessary mitigation measures that would address that situation were it to arise. But that would be on the decision notice, a conditional decision notice. You wouldn't put one after it if a problem was to materialise. But as I'm saying, it shouldn't materialise because you've heard the expert opinion today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Councillor Hill.
Sorry, on a similar point, one of the things that puts cyclists off is high differentials and speed in roads. And in introductory speech to this, it was we prioritise the safety of active transport. Well, not reducing the speed limit is not prioritising the safety of active transport, because there's higher differentials. They're one of the main reasons that people get put off cycling. So I think it should be considered as part of this thing, because that is part of the remit of the thing, is to look at the safety of active transport.
Should you or Matt answer that?
Would you like me to come in on that?
Yes, please,
Chair?
Matt. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So we have a speed management strategy at the County Council, and the overriding message from the speed management strategy is that the speed limit, the legal speed limit of any road, should match the look and feel of the road. So I'm sure we can all think of roads where there's maybe a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, but it doesn't look or feel like a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit because the road is wide and straight. There's not much frontage activity, and there's very poor speed compliance. So in this particular case, Stansted Road doesn't look or feel like a 20-mile-an-hour road. It's quite wide. It's long and straight. Although it's built up. Some of the buildings of the industrial units are set further back and so on. It wouldn't, I can't say this for sure, but I think it's unlikely to get police support, and that's key. For it to become a 20-mile-an-hour look and feel, and therefore go through the speed management group and be accepted in that respect, there would have to be some very significant changes to not just the section outside proposed supermarket here, but it would have to be a full route treatment. Yeah, probably from the roundabout at the A120 roundabout all the way down to the Hockerell Junction. It would have to be considered as a whole route. Speed humps, narrowing the road, a very significant amount of work. And I think with that in mind, there's a test of reasonableness in any planning application. What is it reasonable for a developer to deliver? And in this particular case, we've got some really good, sustainable, active, accessible travel improvements from this developer. It's not going to be cheap for them, but that's not the test in essence. It's a test of necessity, and in our view, it's necessary for there to be a new pedestrian crossing, a new bus stop, an improved northbound bus stop, so on and so forth. Would it be desirable for the speed limit to be reduced? Yes. Is it necessary, which is the test of any development of any condition? I think we would struggle to argue that, to be honest.
Thank you, Matt. Can I just continue with that theme? We understand what you say. We welcome what's being, the measures that are being proposed. They're all in condition 17. So that covers the bus stops and the crossing, the Puffin crossing, and the road entries between Parsonage. It seems to be between Parsonage Lane and just north of the site. That's all welcome, and that's going to improve walking. But there's one omission, which is footpath E2, and that's about 100 meters from the site, quite near the southbound bus stop. And that is a very important east-west walking route, which connects the whole of the parsonage area to Stansted Road, and then it links with Cannons Mill Lane almost opposite, which goes to the other side of town and Rye Street. And I wonder whether that can be added into those measures, because it chimes with everything that you've said about the necessity to foreground active travel.
I'd probably have to see the particular location on a map, Chair, but the signalised pedestrian crossing that this applicant is proposing to put in will obviously get pedestrians from one side of the road to the other in the vicinity of the store.
Yes, that's right. Both each side of Stansted Road, people going north or south, but the footpath includes people that are going east to west and west to east. So, so I think I think within the terms of condition 17, if that could be included, footpaths are not always the same as public highway. So, you know, I understand that sort of thing, but it's a public footpath and it does make, it's a connection. So are there any more questions or comments from members? Councillor Carter.
I have a question, but it's not on sort of accessibility or travel. Is that okay?
Yes, indeed.
So this is just a bit of a clarification really about the swale discharging water into Birchanger Brook. This is item 20.3. And I would just like a little bit of clarification about how often that might be expected to happen.
Probably can't see in the slide, but the swale forms part of the site-wide drainage strategy, and I'm just checking the conditions. So condition 12 requires a detailed surface water drainage strategy for the site, and that identifies 1 to 10 bullet points that relate to the detailed design of that strategy. So part of that, the swale will form part of that wider strategy for the site, and that is a detail that we would consult with the lead local flood risk authority at a condition discharge stage. So at the moment we don't have that detail for consideration, but it is a suitable detail to attach as a condition because it is necessary in this case to before any planning permission is granted.
Neil, can I check with you in terms of the discussion we've had? Are there things that can be taken away? They're all quite informal because it's really the possibility of continuing for the applicant to continue to talk to the resident of 289. It's whether any changes made to delivery times, and it's whether we are able to include footpath E2.
Well, the delivery hours is a discussion with the applicant, and to understand whether there's more that can be done in terms of changing those delivery hours. Obviously, we're not prescribing what they are. The committee is asking us just to, can they be amended to reflect the needs of the adjoining resident. And then the second point about footpaths and footpath E2, I believe that is probably a discussion that we would have to have with the Highways Authority along with the applicant to establish what costs that would relate to, really what benefit it brings to the scheme, and then taking a view as to whether that could be accommodated. What we might be able to do though is to have if it's recommended and members are minded to go down that route, then it's something that possibly could come back for a chair authority acting with the head of planning in order to ensure that's carried out to our satisfaction. I think that's something that we have to do with the constitution in terms of checking whether it has to come back to planning committee if that hasn't been agreed. And so that's a question probably for us to consider.
Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chair. One other point which Councillor Buckmaster pointed out, that in the text it does say the opening hours on a Sunday are till 6 o'clock. And I don't believe that's in accordance with the law because they must be closing at 4, surely. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, you're right, I'm saying that that's what's in the report, but the addendum clarifies that the opening hours are changed to 4 o'clock. So that's what the committee would be voting as a recommendation. But on the servicing and delivery hours, subject to resolution, we will go away and take that away with the applicant and see if that can be improved.
Councillor Copley.
Did we also talk about earlier having a discussion with the applicant about moving the entrance slightly, or was that put to one side and just something they may come back with?
Yes, the I think it sounds as if these are things that might be minuted, so they're not things that we can necessarily incorporate into conditions, but there seems to be a wish that the applicant continues to talk to you and to the planning authority and to the resident about ensuring that whatever can be done can be done.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Condition 3 requires detailed drawings of the vehicular access itself. In terms of it moving, I'm doubtful that it could be moved under the context of the application, because this is what's shown in the application drawings, and you've heard from the Highways Authority, you've heard from planning officers today. Our view is that it doesn't need to move because there isn't a necessity for it to be moved, and so we can't condition it to be moved to a different place because it's not necessary to grant permission, in our view, in this instance.
I didn't expect it to be a condition. I just thought when we were listing those things that we were going to just mention to the applicant, it would be on that list in terms of it was discussed, rather than an actual condition or suggestion about this application, because obviously we would go forward today on what there is, but that could be a separate amendment or just to raise with them.
Yes, I mean, in the light of that, I noticed that the application we have a couple of new considerations which we've had to address. We don't have a new site plan, but there are conditions that are left from the last resolution which still have to be approved. They could have been put onto a site plan. So the boundary treatment, which is clearly on the condition, that could have been drawn on so that we could see that. And the ramp, there's a bit of ambiguity about the UKPN ramp because it's not been made clear. And so these details do have to still be done. There's some design obligation still on the applicant. So thank you. So we're going to move to the recommendation, and the recommendation before us is that planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions set out at the end of this report, and subject to a Section 106 legal agreement, and that delegated authority is granted to the head of planning and building control to finalise the detail of the legal agreement and the conditions. So with that recommendation, is there a member who would like to propose that? Councillor Buckmaster. And do we have a member that will second it? Councillor Watson. And can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please?
11.
And those against? And anybody abstaining? Thank you. So that's carried, and permission is granted for demolition of all the buildings, construction of a shop with associated car parking, reconfigured site access, servicing, landscaping, swale, and plant equipment at 295 to 297 Stansted Road. Thank you, members. So we now go to item 5B. Oh, thank you very much, Matt.
No problem. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
And thank you for getting that to work. Very helpful indeed. It's
The very far left, lines on the left. Yeah, click on that. I think you're on the title. And click on that.
oh, that's right, isn't it? Thank you, Peter. Item 5B, application number 3/23/0775/FUL. This is a full application. Land at the rear of 74, 75 and 76 Magnaville Road in Bishop Stortford. Change of use of the land to residential curtilage and erection of a 1.8 meter height fence set in by 1.5 meters with managed peripheral landscaping. Could I ask Nick Reed to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. The application site is located within Bishop Stortford and is comprising an area of landscaped amenity land within the established Thorley Park housing estate. Slide 3, please. Oh, cool. The area in question is the hashed area. The application seeks planning permission for the change of use of this area for residential use and erection of a 1.8 meter high fence in order to enclose part of the land. It is advised that the land will be equally subdivided and then incorporated into the private gardens of the 6 properties to the north. The fencing would be set in from the western and southern site boundaries by 1.5 meters to provide an area of peripheral landscaping. Can I have slide 4, please? No elevation drawings of the proposed fencing or the proposed landscaping plan were provided. However, the line of the proposed fencing is shown on the site plan on slide 4. Planning permission has previously been refused this year in January under planning reference 3/22/2385 FUL. That's for a similar scheme for the change of use of land to residential use and the erection of a 2 meter high fence. For a bit of context of the site, if we can have slide 5, please. Slide 5. It should be footpaths. Yeah, that's one. Yeah, so slide 5 shows the local footpath network. The lines in purple show public rights of way, and the blue lines show the other footpaths within the local area. And could I have the next slide, please? The next slide shows an aerial image of the sort of local area with the application site outlined in red. Next slide, please. If you just cycle through these slowly, the rest of these are images of the application site itself. As you can see, the site is approximately rectangular in shape and measures approximately 7 meters in width, 50 meters in length. The land is bounded to the north and east by boundary fencing associated with the rear garden areas of the residential properties in Magnaville Road. To the west of the site are 3 parking spaces. To the south of the site is public footpath, which extends in an east-west direction and links into the sort of wider Hertfordshire public right-of-way network. To the south of the site are two-story blocks of flats, which are set within open communal landscape grounds. The site itself is formed of areas of grassland that occupy the southern area of the site, adjacent to the footway. An area of native species hedging and trees occupy the northern and eastern parts of the site. A mature birch tree is located in the southwestern corner of the site. The existing landscaping succeeds in softening the appearance of the surrounding built form and provides visual relief from hard landscape features and contributes to the open and verdant appearance of that characterises the area. Such landscaped areas are important characteristics of the Thorley Park estate and are often focused around pedestrian routes, parking areas and other communal and public areas. The soft landscaping and planting contribute positively to the character and appearance, biodiversity and general amenity of the street scene and form part of the landscape and green infrastructure network across Thorley estate. Officers have considered the application against policies HOU 12, DES 3, DES 4 and NE4 of the district plan and policy GIP 5 of the Bishop Stortford neighbourhood plan for All Saints, Central, South and part of Thorley. Policy 12 is of most relevance to the application proposal as this policy allows for the change of use of residential land only in certain circumstances. Part 2 of this policy states that the council will seek to ensure that the retention of amenity land, open space, landscaped areas within housing estates and permission for the enclosure of such land will not usually be given. Policy DES 3 is also relevant given it states that development proposals must demonstrate how they will retain, protect and enhance existing landscape features which are of amenity value and or biodiversity value in order to ensure there is no net loss of such features. The erection of the proposed fencing and change of use of the land to residential use would result in the enclosure of a valuable area of landscaped amenity space and a loss of green infrastructure within an established housing development. It would introduce a substantial area of hard landscaping into the street scene. The effect of this would be the erosion of the open and verdant character of the area and the visually harmful hard landscaping features into the street scene to the detriment of the area and the amenity of pedestrians using the footpath. An appropriate landscaping scheme has not been submitted and is not considered that a landscape condition would make the proposals acceptable. No arboricultural report or preliminary ecological surveys have been provided in support of the application. As such, insufficient information has been submitted to demonstrate that the proposed development would retain, protect, enhance existing landscape features which are of amenity and or biodiversity value, or avoid the fragmentation of green infrastructure within the built environment, or that appropriate compensatory landscaping could be provided. The proposed development would result in the enclosure and consequent loss of an area of open amenity space, which would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the street scene and the wider area. The proposal fails to demonstrate that the development would retain, protect or enhance biodiversity and green infrastructure. Should planning permission for the proposed development be granted, this would potentially set a harmful precedent for the change of use and enclosure of similar areas of amenity land and open space within the wider Thorley Park estate. The proposed development would be contrary to policies DES 3, DES 4, NE4, HOU 12 of the East Arts District Plan, policy GIP 5 of the Bishop Stortford Neighbourhood Plan, and it is therefore recommended that planning permission be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Could I invite Valda Edmonds, please, to speak? Welcome. You know that you have 3 minutes.
Dear committee, thank you so much for allowing us to attend this meeting tonight. My name is Valda Edmonds and I'm one of the neighbours who has submitted this application. The proposal is pursued on behalf of all the houses from 71 to 76 and a number of the applicants are here tonight. This piece of land has been very problematic for a number of years. We have had a number of problems with the trees and on 2 occasions, with the consent of the council, have had to pay for them to be pillared and cut back. We as a group have looked after this piece of land and it does not come under any landscaping contract. We have ensured that the footpath is kept clear of overgrown weeds and vegetation. Since the introduction of payment for brown bins, the land has also become a dumping ground for garden waste and dog fouling. We have listened to the reasons for the first refusal and changed the application to come into line with the concerns. The fence will come in 1.5 metres and change the height of the fence to 1.8 metres. The peripheral landscape will be planted and looked after by the residents, because currently this piece of land is not fulfilling the positive role that it should. We see this as a good balance, providing more garden space for a number of residents, but still leaving a decent and soft boundary to the footpath, which we will look after. This is currently private land, and Miss Glass, who currently owns this piece of land, has agreed to sell it to us. And it would mean the world to us residents to have this land as part of our gardens and maintain and enhance this piece of the local area. The Town Council voted in favour of this application, and they stipulated that it must be seen as a one-off and not be set as a precedence. Since our last application in May, we have not tended to this piece of land, and as you can see from photos that I sent previously, if this land is left unattended, it will encroach onto the footpath and become problematic to use, especially for prams and wheelchairs, etc. Thank you for your time today, and we hope that you will look favourably at this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Edmonds. Yes, please, yes. And now I'd like to invite the ward councillor, Councillor Diane Holliban, to speak.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this evening, Chairman, and the rest of the committee. Whilst I would not normally approve such an application for Thorley, on this occasion I would support the residents involved in this particular application. This is a one-off application only, which has always been mentioned. Thorley was first developed in 1976. Green areas of space were thought to be beneficial to the residents. Sadly, over a 40-year period of time, some areas have been badly neglected due to private ownership of these small parcels of land. I would advise members that the owner of this parcel of land has agreed to sell the land in question to the residents who have agreed to take this on. This is a unique situation, and the owner of the land is happy to relinquish her entitlement. To my knowledge, this has never happened before on Thorley. I would also add that the Town Council has also supported this application. The few objections made do not stack up, in my opinion. The public footpath will be retained. The residents have agreed with the current owner of the land to take on full responsibility. Yes, they gain a small piece of land into the rear of their gardens of their individual properties, but the advantage will be a tidier, neater, cleaner area once more. No litter, no dog fouling. The current stench on a warm day is not nice to inhale when sitting in the garden, as you can imagine. Even walking along the footpath is not a pleasant experience either. I would urge the committee to overturn the officer's decision to refuse this application, and perhaps even agree that this initiative taken up by the residents to do something positive with this area should be applauded. This is not a precedent being set here, rather a unique approach by the owner of the land and the residents together. I would also mention to members that you've seen many applications in the past from private business owners who want to develop their individual sites on Thorley, and they have been turned down, and quite rightly so. Speculative development is not acceptable, hence my saying this time this is a unique situation, and I hope you will support the residents. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Holliban. Members. Councillor Bull.
Yes, to follow that, Chairman, thank you. All the time I've been a councillor, this is unique, but what a wonderful thing to do. I will support this 100%. I mean, the people that are there at the moment, should it disintegrate and get worse, it will reduce the value on their housing, which no one wants to see, particularly in the climate that we're living in at the moment. The only question, and this is if it goes through tonight to be approved, the people that are living there now, I just wonder if one or two of them move, how they would kind of sign it over to the people that took the premises after then. But of course, that's something that a solicitor would have to draw up and do it properly. But no, I think it's a wonderful idea, and I can support this, Chairman.
Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chairman. I would normally go along with the officer's recommendations, but I think we should put a huge amount of weight behind the fact that the ward councillor and Bishop Stortford Town Council are in favour of this application. For me, that carries a huge amount of weight. Thank you.
Councillor Copley.
Hi, I just had two questions really for the officers. First of all, there's been a lot of discussion here about how it would be a one-off situation, whereas in the report we were talking about setting a precedent. And I wondered if, first question, there was any way that this could be approved without it setting a precedent? And second question, would there be anything in the current application which could be changed, which would make the officers feel that it could be approved, whether there be some kind of minor amendments which might move it across into the recommend to be approved category? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the issue of this being a one-off, I think were we to approve this, that grant of planning permission would become a material consideration for any future applications, specifically within the sort of more immediate area, but also across the wider Thorley Park estate. So I'm not sure whether or not we could control any kind of future development. We would have to give consideration to that decision. In terms of whether or not any amendments could be made to the application, that was obviously considered. Policy HOU 12 is of significant relevance to this application. It specifically looks to retain these particular areas. In terms of whether or not a potential landscaping scheme, for example, could be imposed as a condition, it was considered, but ultimately it was decided that such a condition wouldn't actually overcome the harm that would result from the planning application being approved.
Sorry, can I come in as well on that one? And the scheme that's before you is being considered, of course, and so the officers identified that whether conditions would overcome those concerns in the report, and has mentioned that today, and we've sort of come to the firm view that there are no changes that can be made to support that recommendation. And again, I draw your attention to the fundamental compliance or lack of compliance with that policy HO 12, and that is a route policy to consider this application against, and so it doesn't comply with the development plan on that grounds. And then you've also heard from the guest officer on the other areas of shortcomings in terms of the arboricultural lack of surveys and assessment on the site and its condition. And so a number of those points have been considered, and the officer has considered they are unacceptable and therefore has to be refused.
Members, the context for this application is the housing estate that it forms part of, which is the Colts and Pinchbeck. Is a very distinctive housing development of two-storey blocks of flats. And what makes it distinctive is that it's very spacious in terms of its green space. There's communal green space with a network of footpaths, and the footpath network is what makes this distinctive. The path that this land is next to is part of that network, and that footpath network is accompanied by very short roads. So although this was built decades ago, it is distinctive because of that small amount of road, large amount of footpath network, which is well used. Those pathways are bounded in the main by 1 meter picket fencing. So there's this openness, communal space, and then at the edges where it abuts other private property, you have a harder edge because you have fences that other people to build and so on. That's the context for this. And I've never seen a reason for refusal so laden with policy connections that we must take very seriously, because we have a good development plan. what we're doing is we're protecting and we're enhancing the communal and public open areas for the Colts and Pinchbeck. That's what I think we should bear in mind. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I've had a good look at this site and it reminds me very much of the estate that I grew up on, which had left these pockets of land to the village, and they were subsequently adopted by the parish council and maintained by the parish council. It concerns me that this area is not being maintained. The ownership doesn't seem to be in dispute, so there is an owner. I don't know if there is anything that we could do to ensure that that area is better maintained. I'm not convinced that fencing it off would stop dog fouling. I think that would still be an issue on the periphery, on the 1.5 metres that it's set back. So it concerns me that there are no other steps that we could take. So could we do something to ensure the maintenance? Thank you.
Councillor Copley.
So it was, just bringing on from the point about we're talking about communal areas here, but as Councillor Smith said as well, this is a privately owned area that we're saying some other private residents cannot buy. And I just wondered if Thorley as a whole, this was indicative across Thorley, because we're obviously talking about setting a precedent by doing this, or what about other communal areas? Because it just seems to me to be going into the area of a private sale, and obviously we're talking about planning as well, but I just wanted to clarify that really.
It's not so much a planning matter, but Thorley is distinguished by the fact that there's quite a lot of public amenity space that is privately owned, because the original developer for large areas went into liquidation and sold off little pockets of land. It's public space. So in terms of its land use, it's public land, public amenity space. But it happens to be private owned. That private ownership doesn't change the use. But this is why the precedent is acute, because Thorley area has other pieces of land that are private owned, and there's not a particularly adequate set of planning policies at the moment, but it could set other things in motion. Councillor Hill.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask if the residents, and I thank them for looking after public space, it's very public spirited of them, have considered widening the scheme so the area actually forms a community garden and you have a bigger pool of people, and that would actually set a better precedent for the other private areas in the place, and there'd be more community involvement with it. Because as it is, if you fence it off, it actually might just upset some people, and you may get more antisocial behaviour targeted towards you. And it won't solve the problem of dog fouling, because that's a behavioural issue. It'll just move it.
Councillor Marlowe.
Yeah, I think we're paying for the sins of our fathers on this one. It's really difficult. I'm very concerned about what the future might hold in terms of this particular piece of land and how the arrangement would then work. I don't see that we've got any clear answer to that. And I do think that there's a precedent that's going to be set that's going to be problematic, because we've already had quite a lot of this stuff going on over there, and it would be a shame to lose it. It seems to me that somebody needs to come up with a better plan somehow to deal with this. As I say, I think we are paying for the sins of our fathers on this one. So.
Chair, I wonder if this is a good opportunity for me just to come in and remind the committee about how they come to, how planning decisions are actually made. So planning decisions on applications are made to the extent that development plan policies are material to an application for planning permission. The decision must be taken into accordance with the development plan unless there are material planning considerations that indicate otherwise. So you would see by the officer's report that obviously there's policy justifications for refusing this application. So the committee will really need to bear that in mind and think about material planning considerations to overturn that recommendation.
I think in terms of what members have been saying, there probably is more that could be done, because we know who the owner is. The owner has that responsibility for public land, and I'm sure there's also a management company for the Colts. Once we've made a decision, there's still scope for talking to those people to sort of to remind them that it's part of the public space, part of the public space of the area, and remind them of what their responsibilities are. And indeed, there may be proposals for community involvement in maintaining it or making it a community garden. So members, are we prepared to move to the recommendation?
Chairman, can I just come in again on that? You know, what I've heard this evening, we're talking about sensible people who have got together and kept this in a very tidy situation. I understand as the president it could set, but you know, each time we sit on these committees, every application is discovered on its merits or dismerits. And this one to me is outstanding. That's the reason I support it. And I still stick to my guns that I support that this should be approved. Thank you.
Just in response to that, Chair, obviously we have to consider the planning merits. It may be a nice idea in principle, but you have to come back down to the principles of how you reach a decision on planning applications, and you need to consider the planning principles which the officer has set out in the officer's report quite well.
This committee is the effective owner of the district plan. We understand the applicant's point of view. It's, you know, it's very easy to see that, and as you say, Councillor Bull, it seems very sensible. But there is that way in which we have to just pull back a bit. We have to look in a wider sense. We do have to understand public space and public amenity in the wider area, and that is what the policies in the plan are about very specifically, and it's what the advice we've just had is about. So I think that is the serious policy context in which we have to think about this, you know, understanding the applicant's point of view. So the recommendation is that planning permission be refused for the following reason. The proposed development would result in the enclosure and consequent loss of an area of open amenity space, which would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the street scene and wider area. The proposal fails to demonstrate that the development would retain, protect, or enhance biodiversity and green infrastructure. The proposal would thereby be contrary to policies DES3, DES4, NE4, and HOU 12 of the East Herts District Plan 2018, and policy GIP 5 of the Bishop Stortford Neighbourhood Plan for All Saints Central, South, and part of Thorley First Revision, and the National Planning Policy Framework of July 21 and September 23. Can I see those in favour of the recommendation? Oh, yes. Councillor Watson proposes. And is there somebody who will second the recommendation? Councillor Buckmaster, thank you. So may I now see those in favour of the recommendation to refuse? And can I see those against the recommendation? And are there any abstentions? Thank you, members. So the recommendation is carried and planning permission is refused. Thank you. Members, we come to item 5C. Planning application number 3/23/0440/4. This is at 55 to 61 South Street, 2 to 4 Station Road, Bishop Stortford. And it's the reconfiguration of the ground floor of the building to provide a commercial unit in Class E. Change of use of the first floor to 8 studios, 1 single bedroom and 1 2-bedroom flats with external alterations. Then creation of an additional second floor on the existing building to create 2 studios, 6 single bedroom and 1 2-bedroom self-contained flats. Reconfiguration of car parking, cycle parking, ancillary works. So could I ask Diane?
Thank you, Chair. If we could go to slide 3, please. And this is a site location plan, shows that the subject site is on the corner of South Street at its junction with Station Road and lies within the town centre of Bishop Stortford. It's in a primary shopping area and a secondary shopping frontage. It's also within the Bishop Stortford Conservation Area. Can we go the next few slides? If we go slowly, these are site photos. I mean, this is a few years ago. It's now hoarded over, but you can see what its uses were. It's also going up like in a second story. Now, it is noted that there are 4- and 5-story buildings in close proximity to the application site. So if we go through to slide 5, and that's the Station Road elevation showing the entrance at the rear. And 6 is another photo of that same elevation. Next slide, 7. This shows the Undercroft as you come into the car parking area to the rear. What was the car parking area? We go to slide 8. Both 8 and 9, but 8, this is the rear area which is not laid out, and but vehicles you can see are parked in there. And it's a gated access at the back. If you go to slide 10, now this is the ground floor plan. Just before I go into the ground floor plan, I would like to say the total of 19 units are proposed, as Chair said, 10 studios, 7 1-bed and 2-bed units. No affordable units are proposed. The applicant did submit a financial viability assessment, which has been reviewed by independent assessors, which concluded that the scheme was to be unviable in the sense that this term is understood within the planning system. Therefore, this application, if granted, would be subject to the completion of a satisfactory Section 106 agreement, which would contain a number of financial contributions, as shown in Section 10 of the officer's report. So if we go back to the ground floor, showing the commercial space together with the provision of 24 cycle spaces. As the pavement along the front of the site is a little narrow for cycle stands, there is provision for 24 cycle spaces, 19 of which will be for the residents and 5 of which will be for use by members of the public. It is noticed from past street views that the ground floor has historically been used as a number of separate units in the former use class A1 retail and use class A3 food and drink, both of which now fall into use class E, along with many others that used to be in use class A. 9 vehicle parking spaces will be provided at the rear for use by the commercial units only. You can see to the bottom of the ground floor plan, you've got 2 stair cores to the rear of the building and 1 on the front on South Street, and they both give access to the residential units above. The smaller bin storage area, which is 16, that will be that element of the proposal is for the commercial element, and the larger bin store area, it's got 15, will serve the residential units. Could we go to slide 11, please? This is the first floor plan. Now, units 1, 2, and 3 benefit from private mini space in the form of balconies overlooking the South Street frontage, but they will also have access to the internal courtyard. Units 4 to 9 have access to the communal internal courtyard. Internally, this is envisaged that the amenity area on the first floor will be laid out as a functional private amenity space for shared use by residents, with the possibility of settees, coffee tables, bookcases, for example, together with 28 square meters of locker storage available to residents for their personal use, where all residents can simply come and sit and relax and meet, but beyond the confines of their own individual flats. There's no reason why an area could not be set aside for children if this were to be considered necessary, because we've got no sort of further details of this, but this can be further investigated. Go to slide 12, please. This is the second floor plan and a further 10 units, which would all have access to the communal internal courtyard. The applicant has stated that together with the soft landscaping to the proposed planter bed that it's currently proposed for the second floor courtyard amenity space, the applicant would accept an appropriately worded condition to include surface materiality, because this wasn't submitted with the original application. Likewise, this area could also include some form of informal play feature within the hard landscaping, if indeed this were considered appropriate. However, the proposed mix of homes seeks to provide additional studio and 1-bed apartments for which there is an identified need. However, it is noted that Trinity Street play area is within 3-minute walk of the site, which will provide appropriate opportunities for outside play. We go to slide 13. These are the existing elevations as seen. We go to slide 14. These are the proposed elevations. So you've got the west elevation at the top onto South Street and the north elevation along Station Road. We go to 15. And this is the proposed east elevation. Now, the next few slides are proposed visuals. So we've got a South Street visual and a Station Road visual. And then slide 17. This is street view from South Street, looking at both elevations. Give you an idea of what that would look like from South Street and Station Road. Now we go to 18. This is like slightly aerial view. So you've got the Station Road and the South Street visual, plus the aerial visual to show you how that fits in with the street scene in the locality. If we go to the final slide, which is 19, materials were submitted as part of the application. However, that said, details and specification of all external materials can be submitted for approval by condition. Opportunity to unify the appearance of the 3 levels of facade should be sought through this specification of materials. Now, if you note that the South Street frontage is set back slightly to give the balcony effect. Now, this did go to our conservation offer and urban design. And we looked at the same happening on the Station Road frontage. However, due to structural constraints, this will result in a less successful frontage onto Station Road. However, it is deemed that the articulation of the design and materials on the second floor will help mitigate solidity of the form to an acceptable level. as said by the Conservation and Design team. They also requested the corner windows. So if we go back to 17, these are the ones that they were talking about, and these have been amended. So you've got the fenestration on this sort of very prominent corner. And they wanted the spacing of the first floor windows on station road elevation, were revisited and changed. And then if we go back to slide 15, you can see on the east elevation to the rear, the existing blocked up window, which was originally blocked up, has now been reopened. So the conservation offer now says that the fenestration is now satisfactory and in keeping with the conservation area. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Diane. Members. Oh, Councillor Watson.
Can I just check how many recycle bins were provided? It looked like there were a handful of the refuse collection didn't look.
What, the area down on the ground floor?
Was that something like half those bins, I presume, are for recycling for 19 flats?
Yes, it would be, but we've also got a condition that covers that. And we need further details of that.
Councillor Devonshire.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, in favour of this, I think this site does need developing. It's a very prominent site in Bishop Stortford. However, and we've said it before, I'm going to say it again, I think it is very, very disappointing that there is no affordable housing. I've heard the reasons why, but I think this is a prime site for affordable housing. It's very close to the station for public transport in and out of London. I just want to say that. Thank you.
Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. It's, a site that needs, redevelopment. It's, become quite an eyesore in Stortford. But I'm very concerned about the extra second floor added to it, because it will become quite overbearing against its neighbouring properties. And as you drive into Stortford, certainly if you drive into Stortford from the south, you have the very overbearing Wrenbridge development on Bishop Stortford South, and then if you then go up South Street, you'll then be faced with this rather overbearing development on the corner. So I would have preferred it not to have had that second floor. I think just to develop the commercial on the first floor would have been perfect. I'm not overly convinced we need that many studio flats in Stortford. I accept we need 1 and 2 bedroom flats, but I'm not sure about the number of studio flats.
Councillor Watson.
Can I ask, how much bearing does the tilted balance and the lack of affordable housing supply bear on this, will have on this?
I mean, in the way that's set out in the report, it gives weight to provision of housing, and in this instance, that's weighed against the elements of the scheme that weigh against it. In this instance, the benefits outweigh the limited harm that has been identified. Diane, you recall that the report doesn't find harm to the character of the conservation area, therefore that doesn't weigh greatly against the recommendation. And so on the tilted balance, the scheme is found to be acceptable. But if we take a step back, even if there wasn't a tilted balance, the development is broadly compliant with the local plan, save for that policy on affordable housing. But because of the justification given by the officer and setting out the viability case, that is a material consideration that means that affordable housing cannot be provided in this instance.
Is it possible to hear what the report does talk about the urban design advice, and it talks about the scale, but could you give some response to Councillor Buckmaster's comment about the second floor?
Yes, I mean, the Conservation Officer and Urban Design Officer found this to be acceptable, and I did have a long conversation with her, but she said because of higher, if you go across to the other corner on Station Road, I know there's a single story, but then you go to a 4-story development, and she was of the opinion that it was quite acceptable in the conservation area. So I can only go by her expert opinion.
Councillor Copley.
I mean, I'm also concerned, like Councillor Buckmaster, with this being on a very narrow corner. I know what we're comparing to, but that's an open bit where the station is, and then you come into this very narrow road, and you're putting a 3-story on a corner where you already don't have very good visibility to go around that. So I would be interested from the traffic perspective, and also you've got that narrow entrance right on the junction going in now to how many different studio flats. There's more people coming through there, and I'd just be very, very concerned from like a traffic and a pedestrian access point, and the fact that it is basically blind on that corner already, and you're basically going to make it worse. I mean, I'm really concerned about this from a safety perspective, I'll be honest. And then, yeah, I would be interested to know more about the traffic thoughts on this. Thank you.
Well, it was looked at, right, obviously. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. The county council's transport, and they found it to be acceptable. They did mention, however, sorry, okay, they did mention about access for delivery vehicles, but we have put a condition on there that we want a service and delivery plan to be submitted to and approved by, in writing by the local planning authority.
Thank you. Could I just double check the access is exactly the same access as it is now? Because you can't see a car coming out of that. You honestly can't when you drive up to it. If there's delivery vehicles coming out, again, I just think there's safety concerns here.
Yeah, there's no change to that access.
Right. You can't, when people come out of there as though they're coming out blind, you don't see them. But anyway.
Can I just confirm or get you to confirm something, which is that this is a conversion of an existing building, and so the pavements are very narrow, but it's the situation. I mean, we welcome a conversion of a building because it's not demolishing it and starting again. But is that how you see it?
Yeah, that's how I see it, because it's mainly a refurbishment and a reconfiguration of that first floor, and just to try and bring it back into the vitality of the town centre.
Did the architect have a look at setting back the shop fronts? So I know there's a concrete column. There are concrete columns that go along the edge, but did they look at setting back the shop windows so that there's more pavement space?
Well, on the commercial unit on both South Street, no, that wasn't considered, no.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Can I just confirm about parking? In 9.7, it says that they're proposing parking for staff only. Is there no residence parking?
No residence parking, no, it's just cycle spaces.
And can I check the cycle spaces? Is that secure parking? Is it sort of sheds?
Yeah, it's underneath the Undercroft. If you go to, which was the ground floor plan number 10. You see it's set back underneath that Undercroft bit where there's 24 cycle spaces there.
And Diane, did you say in your presentation that some of those were for staff and some were for residents and some were for visitors?
Yes, Chair. The applicants have stated that there are 19 for residents and there are 5 for public use.
Can I confirm the 5 for public use, are they in the same secure area as the 19 for,
They are indeed. Yeah.
and doesn't that compromise the security?
Quite possibly.
Is there a distinction here? Then not necessarily public, they are for visitors.
Visitors, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to the commercial elements or visitors to the residential units.
And so there's no cycle parking provided for public use of the shop or whatever it might be. That's just going to be whatever town said. Cycle parking there
Cycle
might
park,
be.
yeah.
Staff. So is there staff cycle parking? There's staff.
No,
car
staff
parking.
parking, but I
Yes.
can't see any, staff cycle
Okay.
parking. They haven't mentioned it, no.
Councillor Marlowe?
Yeah, could you just explain the fire exits on this plan? Do they have we got two there? So, and is that accessible by all properties within?
The upstairs properties, yes, the one at the rear and there's one on the front.
Right.
I've got two means of escape.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. This is point 9.23, which is about biodiversity net gain. Which says that the baseline value of the site is 0 units. And the post-development value is 0.05 units, and it results in a net change of positive 286%. I'm not sure how we get from 0%. 0% that would give you 286%. I'm not sure how that's been worked out, but that figure there is then quoted, and it makes it sound like this is an amazing kind of biodiversity net gain, which of course it's not. So I'm not sure about the maths on that point.
Yes, the information submitted was looked at by the council's ecology officer, and this is coming direct from his report.
You did mention in your presentation that there's a first floor communal area and there's a second floor open to the sky area. The first floor is covered by ceiling.
They're both internal.
I thought the one on the top floor is open to the sky.
No, because you've got a roof plan above that with a photo panels proposed.
So
they're both internal.
Both internal.
Both internal courtyards, yeah.
So that makes the biodiversity even more dubious. But you did mention that there were possibilities of looking more. So could there be a condition specifically about the design and use of those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was sort of edging towards, that we should have conditions. So we want to know what materials are used and what's going to be provided in both of those areas. I did try and explore this prior to coming to committee, and they said they're open to discussion. But I hadn't had any details until this moment.
Thank you. Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so actually, who takes responsibility of looking after those communal areas? Is there going to be a management plan?
Not that I'm aware of. That can be discussed. Well, I'd say it's not in the application.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. This is really a fairly new person to the committee. I wonder if somebody could just explain about the legal agreement, which sort of gives leeway for a review of the affordable housing provision. So this is in 10.1, the upward only financial review mechanism about scheme viability. Just be interested to know more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Because the scheme doesn't provide a policy compliant level of affordable housing, we consider it necessary to have another chance to review the viability at a later date. So if the development commences, or before the development commences, if residential values improve, if there are other forces at play that mean that development becomes more viable, then the local authority is entitled to seek a review mechanism to get a second go at understanding the viability at that time. And so for a scheme of this scale, you could reasonably expect to see a single review mechanism to get another chance to look at that viability at the time.
Committee will have more training and briefing about affordable housing in due course. So members, are we prepared to go towards the recommendation? Councillor Hill?
So I may have missed it, but is there any accommodation of solar heating in the roof base? So solar panels, I couldn't see it.
Yeah, solar panels are going to go on the roof, and there's a condition saying that they have to submit details of them.
So members, the recommendation is that planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions set out, with the addition of a condition about the use and design of the first floor communal area and the second floor communal area, and subject to a section 106 legal agreement, and that delegated authority is granted to the head of planning and building control to finalize the detail of the legal agreement and conditions. And we need to just also mention that you, in an addendum report, you said that the use of the ground floor would be open class E.
Yes, that it was too restrictive, so it's gone to Class E because it would make it more viable for them to get somebody into those units.
Yeah, so that includes shop and office and
professional services and
okay, thank you. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Devonshire, thank you. And somebody to second. Thank you, Councillor Marlowe. Can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? And those against the recommendation? And those abstaining, please? Thank you, members. That's carried and permission is granted. Then we go on to item 6. This sets out recent appeal decisions where we can see appeals that have been dismissed, which is what we like to see, and appeals that are allowed, which we sometimes have to check. Are there any questions about those appeal decisions? So if we note that information, thank you. And the decision, the inspector's decision letters are in that item as well. Then we have a list of new appeals. And then we have the performance statistics of the planning authorities dealing with the time it takes to deal with major and minor and other applications. And we note that the figures are good. They are within the targets set by government. Does anybody have any questions about those? Could officers just remind us, please, what is the target determination time for minor applications?
I believe we're targeting 80% within the 8 weeks.
Within 8 weeks. And what's the time limit target for major applications?
I believe we're targeting the same for 13 weeks. And that's.
Thank you. So we note that information. And then finally, there are 2 dates, a public inquiry and an informal hearing for 2 appeals for our information. Any questions on all of those things? So we're happy to note those. So that concludes all the business members. Thank you very much. That is 9:34, and that's the end of the meeting.